Everybody, by my clock, I have 3:30. Lindsay, are you ready to get started?
I am ready.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for Hatfield Research Seminar. My name is Cinnamon Moffett, and I'm the Research Program Manager at Oregon State University's Hatfield Marine Science Center in Newport, Oregon, and I will be your host for today. Just wanted to let you know that we have your mics, cameras, and screen shares turned off. If you could help us by keeping it that way, that would be great. We do hope that you ask us lots of questions, and you can do that by using the chat box, which you can find at the bottom or the top of your screen. You click on the little pop-up box and you'll get a little place where you can put in your questions. Please do so at any time, and we'll get to those questions at the end of today's presentation. Also wanted to let folks know that we are recording today's presentation, and it'll be posted on the past seminar page for Hatfield in a few days, and I'm putting that in the chat box now, so you have that link if you would like it. Please feel free to share that if you see something that's really interesting, or rewatch it if you missed something that went a little too quick. So just want to take a second to promote next week's seminar, same place, same time. That will be on February 25th. Sean Rowe from the College of Education at Oregon State University is going to be talking about public science communication in a virtual world, honing your story for virtual tours, exhibits, and talks. And this has been prompted by the fact that we are going to have a virtual Marine Science Day this year. And so Sean is going to come and help us learn a little bit more how to craft our message for that particular event. But I think that we'll find all sorts of tips and tricks that he's going to give us that we can use even for communicating in events like this. So come and join us next week, February 25th, for Sean Rowe's talk. And if you want to find out anything else about our events that are coming up at Hatfield, you can Google HMSC, scroll to the bottom of our landing page, and you will find a calendar of events there. But why we're all here for today is to learn a little bit more from Lindsay Aylesworth, who is the Ecological Research Program Leader for Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife's Marine Reserves Program, where she oversees the program's ecological monitoring and research. She has received her doctorate degree and completed a postdoc research fellowship at the University of British Columbia, where she focused on data-poor marine species in Southeast Asia. Over the past 10 years, Lindsay has worked on a variety of marine issues, including bycatch, endangered species research, coral reef ecology, and fisheries management. So she has worked on all sorts of different things. She has her master's degree in coastal environmental management from Duke University and served as a Fulbright scholar in Brazil. So she has done all sorts of amazing things, and we're so excited to have her here today to share with us. So Lindsay, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Cinnamon, for that introduction. Hi, everyone, I'm Lindsay. I am the project leader for the Marine Reserves Program here in Oregon. I'm based on Newport, kind of the center of the Oregon coast here. I apologize that I don't actually have video sharing capabilities on my older state laptop, but got a little picture of myself down here at the bottom, so you'll know who you're dealing with here. All right, so I am here today to share with you our brand new ODFW Marine Reserves data dashboard. And one of the reasons why I'm sort of here to share about it is that it's one of the success stories of our program coming out of 2020. So in November of 2020, we launched our data dashboard, which is a web-based tool with the aim of allowing interested users the ability to explore our monitoring data and to learn more about the species and monitoring trends that we see here off the Oregon coast. This is really exciting, in part for us because this is the first time our monitoring data is easily accessible for public exploration. And it's actually a great way for us to broaden the reach of our program, not just to a wider audience in Oregon, but across the United States and actually in other countries. And since we launched this data dashboard in November, we've had visitors from at least 9 other countries so far. So I'm here to tell you today a little bit about the story behind the data dashboard, how we created it, a little bit about the exciting things you can see in the dashboard, some of its limitations, and kind of the procedure for how you'd go about collaborating with us in the future if some of this piques your interest in future research. So, like many people probably here on this Zoom seminar call, our activities during 2020 were influenced by COVID, and a lot of our ability to get out in the field for data collection was reduced. We were still able to get out for some data collection, but not as much as we typically do. But this meant we could really spend the much needed time for organizing the 10 years of data that we have in our program, for editing databases, doing quality control checks. I'm going to call it the non-sexy side of being, in the marine biology field, and really doing some analysis, exploring our data to get it ready, for more scientific evaluation. And in part, these efforts are not really solely attributable, to COVID, but actually our Oregon Marine Reserves program will undergo a legislative review in the year 2023. And our program is responsible for writing a synthesis report summarizing the first 10 years of our Marine Reserve program implementation. And so for our ecological team, this means detailed analyses of the 10 years of monitoring data. And so we also needed to put in that time on data management for that reason. But since we did, we were able to take this opportunity to create the data dashboard. So while perhaps some of you might be anxiously awaiting that, very scientific report showing all of our analyses, now is actually a time for everyone to be able to dive in now ahead of that report and explore some of the monitoring data of what we're finding. I'm going to delve a little bit more and take us on a trip to actually the dashboard itself, but this is a screenshot from one of the reserves on the data dashboard. And so you can explore different types of data across our multiple different reserves and comparison areas for multiple years of data collection. And I'd really like to give a shout out to my fellow ecological team members for all their effort to make this happen. It's not often that all the effort one spends on data management, the underappreciated side of science, actually results in something you can physically see. So that in and of itself was very exciting. And it's also really exciting to see all of our monitoring data, in one place. And so the dashboard really helps us create a spirit of discovery for our program, as it allows users to explore the reserves and the species and the trends on the dashboard. It also allows some instant data access without a formal data use agreement to allow potential collaborators the ability to explore the data and spark new ideas without going through this more time-intensive process. And really, we're also excited about the data dashboard because it provides a great opportunity for people to learn more about the Oregon coast, about what species we're observing where, and learn more about our Oregon marine reserves. Many people just experience the reserves possibly from land looking out and don't know very much about the species or the habitats that lie beneath the surface. And so the dashboard also allows some exploration in a user-friendly way to sort of share our Oregon Marine Reserve story to a broader audience. And we also hope that it generates additional interest for more formal collaborations, perhaps for some class projects or future research, or maybe graduate students who are looking for research ideas. So the data dashboard really highlights, exploring and in learning about our marine reserves here on the coast. It also provides increased transparency. Our program's been in existence for 10 years, and it really shows the monitoring efforts that we've been able to put forth at the different reserves, so people are able to know what types of monitoring we've done where and when. Another aspect of our marine reserves here in Oregon is really that each site is unique. I'll delve a little bit more into this as we go through the talk today, but really we have different pages on the dashboard that are dedicated to each reserve site in order for people to really understand how monitoring differs at each site, how the species differ at each site, to really enhance our understanding of why our reserves are special here in Oregon. So now I'm gonna do a quick overview or perhaps a refresher about the marine reserves that we have here in Oregon, just in case you're new to our community, or perhaps you're tuning in from around the globe, or maybe you just need a refresher because it's been a while. Oregon has 5 marine reserves off of our coast. And by marine reserve, I mean a place in the ocean where there is no ocean development or fishing allowed. Many of the marine reserves also have marine protected areas located around them. These are places, again, where no ocean development is allowed, but some fishing is allowed. In Oregon, we had a staggered implementation of our sites, and marine reserves in Oregon are also a relatively new management tool. And so what do I mean by new? Well, our oldest marine reserve sites began in 2012, and that's at the Otter Marine Reserve. That's very close here off the Central Coast to Newport, and the Redfish Rocks Marine Reserve, which is down on the South Coast off of Port Orford. 2 years later, we had 2 more marine reserves join our system here in Oregon at the Cascade Head Marine Reserve, just on the northern part of Lincoln City, and the Cape Perpetua Marine Reserve down near Yachats. And then our newest marine reserve had restrictions begin in 2016. So the Cape Falcon Marine Reserve is our youngest marine reserve here on the coast. So you can see our marine reserves in Oregon are a relatively new management tool for us here. Oregon has 3 main goals of the marine reserves. They are to conserve habitats and biodiversity, basically to serve as research sites to help us gain a better understanding of ocean changes and how to better manage our nearshore resources. And the final goal for the marine reserves is all about communities. In Oregon, the Oregon way, it was very important for us to make sure that the marine reserves did not impact local ocean users and coastal communities. And so because we have communities as one of the main goals of our marine reserves, we have a human dimensions monitoring program here that complements our ecological monitoring. And that's a really unique feature of our marine reserves program here on the coast. Perhaps you're wondering, how many people are on this marine reserves team? We have 6 full-time ODFW employees, plus 2 fellows and a smattering of temporary employees and interns from time to time. This is our current team photo taken and put together in COVID times of everyone who's on our team currently. And so the 6 main staff of the Marine Reserves program are broken up to focus on 4 main components. I'm in charge of the ecological monitoring and research, and there are 2 others on my team who are ODFW employees to help support this work. We also work with an OSU Science Integration Fellow. We only have one person in charge of our human dimensions research. Dr. Tommy Swearingen is a man who fosters many collaborations to get his work done. He's currently also supported by an Oregon Sea Grant Fellow. We have one person who is in charge of the administration of our program and does our policy work. That's Kristen Don. And then we also have a permanent staff member dedicated to outreach and engagement. And this position is currently vacant. So I mentioned previously that there was going to be a Marine Reserve evaluation. And so I thought I just might take a few minutes to explain what that means. So the program really spun up in 2010. And since this is a new management tool here in Oregon, the legislature mandated that there would be a program evaluation in the year 2023 as a check-in to make sure that our program was on the right track to be set up for a long-term monitoring program. And so I have here on the timeline when the restrictions at the reserves, when the reserves began. We have this 2023 evaluation year circled over here. And so prior to that, in 2022, there will be a university evaluation, sort of a peer review process of our Marine Reserves program. And it'll focus on all aspects of the program, not just ecological research and monitoring or human dimensions research and monitoring, but also evaluating communications and outreach efforts, community engagement, compliance and enforcement, and management plans, all the different mandated components of our program. And so to inform both the report to the legislature and this university peer review process, there will be a synthesis report that we are currently working on that's going to be written and due at the end of this year, which basically summarizes all that we've learned in the 10 years of implementing the Marine Reserves program here in Oregon. So it should include some really exciting things about, lessons learned and new contributions to the field. So that process is currently happening as we speak. So again, just in case it's been a while, or in case you're new to our community, I thought I would just quickly go over a little bit. How did we get these marine reserves here in Oregon? After a governor's executive order in 2008, there was a very, very extensive public process where the public and community groups worked with the state to site the marine reserve areas off of our coast. This was a multi-year process. It actually included a lot of discussion and evaluation about how to balance both ecological benefits of having marine reserves here in Oregon while attempting to reduce negative impacts to ocean users and coastal communities. Because of this balance, the resulting reserves that we have here in Oregon are not uniform, and they're different shapes, different sizes, they have different characteristics, and they are really a result of this compromise between the trade-offs between ecological benefits and socioeconomic impacts to our communities. So let's just go over a couple of marine reserve stats here in Oregon. So the marine reserves themselves represent about 3% of Oregon's state waters or territorial sea. But if we include the marine protected areas also, that number bumps up to about 6% of Oregon state waters. The distance between each marine reserve site mostly ranges from about 30 to 80 kilometers, with the exception being the distance between Cape Perpetua and the Redfish Rocks Marine Reserve in the south. Here in Oregon, we have 2 known bioregions. And so the Redfish Rocks Marine Reserve is representative of the southern bioregion, and we have 4 marine reserves in the northern bioregion. Again, in terms of representing habitat in our state waters, in the marine reserves themselves, 4% of the rock habitat is located in marine reserves, 13% of mixed habitat and 4% of sand habitat are located in our marine reserves. Perhaps you're wondering a bit about size. On the scale of things, our marine reserves here in Oregon are fairly small. Our largest marine reserve is 14 square miles. And our smallest marine reserve, which is located at Otter Rock, is only just over 1 square mile. Another interesting characteristic about the marine reserves is that they had different historical fishing pressure, especially on the nearshore rocky reef assemblages prior to the restrictions being put in place for the reserves. So for example, at the Cascade Head and Redfish Rocks Marine Reserve, both these areas had very high fishing pressure, whereas at Otter Rock and Cape Falcon, both of these sites had relatively low fishing pressure. And so all of this really plays into our expectations for change over time at each of the sites. And we know here in Oregon that with our marine reserves, design and placement matters. Again, the reserves vary in their sizes, in their depths, in the type of habitats they contain. The communities around the marine reserves and the local fisheries all have different characteristics, and there were different historical fishing pressures. And all of this really emphasizes that each marine reserve site here in Oregon is unique. And so as we sort of analyze the data, we're really looking at each of these reserves as its own unique case study. And so to this effect, each reserve really tells its own unique story. So for example, at the Cascade Head Marine Reserve and at the Redfish Rocks Marine Reserve, both of them have good amounts of hard bottom rocky reef habitat, and both had high historical fishing pressure. But what's really different between the two communities is if we look at some of the fishing community characteristics that used these areas prior to closure. And up at the Cascade Head Marine Reserve, it was used quite heavily by the charter fishing fleet, mostly out of Depot Bay. And down at Redfish Rocks, this area was utilized by the commercial longline fishery. And this fishery is actually quite unique down south, especially in Port Orford, and represents the largest proportion of sort of longline fishing on our coast happens in this area. And so even though at both of these sites, we might expect that for some fish species, they may show change due to reserve protections over time, the species that are impacted by these two different types of fishing communities may likely be different. Now let's take a little trip up north to the Cape Falcon Marine Reserve. I like to think of the Cape Falcon Marine Reserve as the null hypothesis. And that's in part because in the Cape Falcon Marine Reserve, there's little hard bottom rocky reef habitat. And it's also an area where there's very low historical fishing pressure. So as we think about, what it means to put in restrictions on fishing in an area where there wasn't really very much fishing to begin with, if we track some of those fish species over time, we don't really anticipate that there would be much change due to, restricting the low fishing effort in this area. And so if you think about setting up a sampling design, you would have a comparison area that also has similar fishing pressure. But again, that's sort of, a null hypothesis of there wasn't much fishing pressure, so we're not removing much. We would anticipate the changes to be very similar. But the way that we've gotten around this, and what we've really done with a lot of our monitoring in each of the reserves, is we tailor the monitoring to the specific reserve. And so what we've done is we've really also included comparison areas with varying amounts of fishing pressure to be able to look to see how the fishing pressure changes in these other areas where there is additional fishing pressure. So really the Cape Falcon site is great for trying to understand community changes across a gradient of fishing pressure. If we move down to the Otter Rock Marine Reserve, which is our smallest marine reserve, it's also a reserve that encompasses really quite shallow subtidal habitats. It also had low historical fishing pressure. And so this reserve is really a great place for us to understand how those shallow subtidal and rocky intertidal communities change over time. And if we take a trip further down the Oregon coast to the Cape Perpetua Marine Reserve, which is our largest marine reserve, the Cape Perpetua Marine Reserve has the only rock habitat within this region of the coast, and it's a deep reef. It's very isolated, and it's very small and patchy. But what prior research by ODFW has actually shown is that this isolated reef actually attracts quite a high diversity of species to this area. Prior to the Marine Reserve implementation, this area was also an oceanographic study site. So this is one of the places where we have a lot of knowledge about hypoxic or low oxygen conditions here on the Oregon coast, and that it impacts communities. And so for these reasons, the Cape Perpetua Marine Reserve is a really great reserve for trying to understand community responses to changing ocean conditions. So I've just spent a little bit of time talking about why each of the reserves is unique and some of our expectations with the sites. Now let's dive a little bit into our ecological monitoring, again, just to set the context for looking at some of the data on our data dashboard. So our ecological program has three main objectives, and two of them have to do with monitoring to detect long-term changes on the Oregon coast. And so what do we monitor? We monitor a suite of components in the ecosystem, from algae to fish to invertebrates, to be able to really have a big ecosystem level picture of changes that are happening in these areas. We monitor with 4 core tools. These are tools that were selected based on ODFW in-house expertise. And so we collect data through scuba diving surveys that target shallow habitats. We conduct video lander, so underwater camera survey work. We also do surveys in deeper areas with a remotely operated vehicle. And all 3 of these visual tools gather information on the different habitats, invertebrates, and fish communities in these areas. We also have a survey method that really attempts to mimic some of the nearshore commercial and recreational fishing that happens off of our coast through hook and line sampling. Our program has also worked to develop several other long-term collaborative monitoring tools, which really focus on studying juvenile fish, intertidal biodiversity, oceanography, sea star health and recovery from wasting disease, and also urchin diver surveys. And so these are all collaborative programs with different agency or university or collaborative consortium groups, both in Oregon and throughout the West Coast. So how do we sample? So we sampled before the restrictions were implemented at each of the marine reserves, and we also continued to do monitoring afterwards. We sample not only in the reserves themselves, but also in comparison areas. And so these are places with similar habitats, depths and sizes to the reserves themselves, but where fishing and ocean development are allowed. And the goal of the program is to monitor and to explore changes over time in these communities and habitats. So really our program is responsible for monitoring at 14 different sampling sites up and down the Oregon coast. So 5 marine reserves and then 9 different comparison areas along the coast. So with a team of 3, it's quite the task. Okay, so now let's jump into actually exploring some of the data dashboard. That's why we're all here. So I'm gonna have Cinnamon go ahead and put a link to the dashboard in the chat, if you wouldn't mind. Okay, and we are going to switch to hopefully looking at my screen here where we're actually on the data dashboard site. So when you first arrive at the site, you'll see this welcome page, which has some brief instructions about how to use the dashboard and has icons of the monitoring tools that are the focus of the dashboard. And so let's really, I guess, jump into some of the cool stuff we have here. So on this left-hand side here, you can see there are different tabs or links that you can click on. And there are different links for each of our 5 marine reserves. So if we start at the Redfish Rocks Marine Reserve, and if we jump into the page here, what you'll see is obviously the name of the site at the top, but then you'll see the different icons or monitoring tools that we use over here on the right-hand side of the page. We also have a little description about why this reserve makes an interesting case study here in Oregon. In the middle here, there's a picture of the reserve along with some quick facts about each marine reserve. So when the harvest restrictions began, when monitoring began, the size of the reserve, the depth of the reserve, the habitats, prior fishing pressure, and the different monitoring areas. As we scroll down a little bit, you'll see up pops a initial graph, some various plot options, and a map over here that shows habitat. So I'm going to switch here and start off by looking at some hook and line data. So if we come over here to these plot options, you'll see that you have the option to select exploring data at a marine reserve or at the comparison areas. The marine reserve data are always in red. The comparison data are always in green. You'll see you also have the option to select different survey tools to be able to see what the data trends look like across different tools. Within each tool, there's typically an option to choose a different variable to explore. So with our hook and line data right now, we're taking a look at the catch per unit effort, which is basically the fish caught per angler per hour. But if we click on that link there, you can see there are several different options of variables to explore for this tool. And if you go down here to choose a species, you can also switch species. So we could take a look at lingcod to see what we can see here at the Redfish Rocks Marine Reserve. So what typically is the default is a main figure, but then there's also a tab over here on the graph side, which is a species composition figure. And so if you click on that, it should show you these bar graphs highlighting sort of what the species composition of our hook and line surveys looks like over the years. So if we switch to a different reserve, just to click around a little bit and also get a comparison. Now we're at the Otter Rock Marine Reserve. So again, we can see we have our icons up here, and there are only 2 different monitoring tools that we use here at the Otter Rock Marine Reserve. And I should mention that this website really focuses just on our core monitoring tools. Those collaborative monitoring tools that I talked about are not featured here on this site. There are links that you can see in some of the other pages to link to our partner sites where some of the data are housed, or in some cases we may be working with partners to potentially add the data into this site. But right now this site focuses only on our core monitoring tools. Again, you can see a quick little description about why this reserve makes a good case study. We again have the details of the reserve. And again, there are, the option to explore different species. Right now, we have up the scuba data, and these are invertebrate data. So for example, we could take a look at red sea urchins to explore what we may be finding at the Otter Rock Marine Reserve. Okay. Now, I guess I just wanted to talk really quickly about some of the caveats or limitations with the data. First, basically, all the data that are on the site are preliminary data. So what do we mean by that? So they've been vetted through our QA/QC process, and they are ready, to be explored. But on this site, we did not provide all the survey data from all of our survey efforts. There are some species that we have additional data on that are not listed here. There are some different types of different components of the surveys that again are not listed here. For example, with our ROV data, we don't have the invertebrate data set up yet. Sorry about that. Back here to the taskbar. Here we go. And additionally, on the website here, we haven't made any attempts to statistically quantify the patterns that we're seeing or any differences between the sampling locations. And that's really for a couple different reasons. The first is that we wanted to keep this website simple, easy to use, and accessible. Really sort of delving into some of the statistics about the data that we see. You can find that in our reports and our manuscripts that are found on our website, and there's some links to that in the either FAQ or about our program page. And we are currently working our way through analyses of the data collected by our program for that synthesis report. And we really just wanted to provide people the opportunity to explore the data as they are now while we work our way through the synthesis report. So anyway, we wanted to keep it simple and accessible and also not overwhelm people with all the different types of data that the program collects. So we're hoping that this is an easy to use, friendly website that really helps people to explore the type of data that's being collected by our program. And then just another quick reminder that here off the Oregon coast, we do have a cold, temperate environment. And so that means that for many of the long-lived species here, in particular some of those fish species, it will take a minimum of at least 10 to 15 years to show a potential response to marine reserve effects. Also, remember, not all species would we anticipate to respond the same to implementation of a marine reserve. They have different life histories, they have different roles and interconnections in the food web. There are factors related to oceanographic conditions and habitat. So just as you're exploring the data on our dashboard, please keep those thoughts in mind. Okay. So hopefully now you've had a little bit of time to explore some of the data in an informal way, but hopefully in a way that helps to inform what we've been observing here. But just in case this actually gets you excited about collaborating in a more formal way, we do have a data request form that is available up on our website. There should also be a link on the on the data dashboard to it. And so if you want to actually have some of the data to be able to explore some of your own stats or combine it with data or look at it perhaps for future grant proposals or class projects of some sort, that then does require a data use agreement between ODFW and the interested party before any sort of official data can be exchanged. And as part of that process, ODFW does need to review any final product that comes out of the data sharing agreement, in part just to make sure that the data are used correctly and also to make sure that there's appropriate acknowledgement. So I hope with our exploration through the dashboard today that you will agree with us, really, that we're excited about the dashboard because it's a great opportunity to promote exploring and learning about the species and the trends we see here on the coast, about the Marine Reserve Program in Oregon. It increases the monitoring transparency of our program. You can see what data we've collected, where and when, for our core monitoring tools. And it really helps our program to communicate the different ways in which each of the marine reserve sites is unique. So that ends my presentation about the data dashboard, and I can take any questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. And there are a few questions, and for folks that have any more, please put them in the chat and we'll work through them as we get them. And I just want to say thank you. That was an amazing amount of work, I know, to get something that has all that data presented in such a usable tool. So thank you for sharing with us. So Lindsay, the first question that I have is asking if there are similar programs in Washington or California, and do you or how do you coordinate with them?
So the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and in California, they have a statewide network of marine protected areas. They actually have quite a few more protected areas than we do here in Oregon. I believe it's 124, I think. And we've actually done a lot of consultation with various partners and research groups in California with our core monitoring tools. Needless to say, we did not reinvent the wheel. We did actually look to California to see what had worked well for some of their monitoring efforts, since their program started before ours did here in Oregon. But with our 4 core monitoring tools, we have had to adapt them here to the Oregon coast. I think, as many people know, our coast here can be quite an energy-filled environment, which is definitely different than some spots, particularly in Southern California. But we collaborate frequently and have expert listservs to collaborate and share information about monitoring, and to talk about larger West Coast wide trends. And we also partner with various groups through collaborative projects that are also in California as well. Washington State does not have a state level marine protected areas program, but they do have the Olympic National Sanctuary. So they do have a protected area in Washington, but it's run federally. So we do look to collaborate with various groups, even some groups in British Columbia as well. They are currently in a phase where they are working through their marine protected area planning process in British Columbia. So they're just getting started there.
Great. Keep the questions coming and we'll kind of work through them here. The next one, Lindsay, can you talk about how you think this tool might serve a natural resource manager?
Sure. I suppose as a natural resource manager, I guess there are a couple of different ways that you could use this tool. I guess, one of it could be through the lens of looking at it as a possible option for, I'm going to say, science communication about your program, about making the data that you collect easily accessible to, interested parties of the public or the research community, for people to actually see, what activities your program is doing and the data that you're collecting and some of the trends. So I guess I would say one option is creating something like this available. Is that something that's of interest to your program? I guess potentially another one might be that, if you are interested in a particular species, and you are on the West Coast, you can look to see the data that we're collecting. And if it's, of interest, we're always looking, to collaborate or, more formally share data to that degree as well. And I guess I think it would also just, again, to, share information about, the methods that our program is using, the different collaborations that we have. Now, I will say this isn't the only sort of website that our program has. We do have a website, OregonMarineReserves.com, which has a link to this web-based data tool, the data dashboard, but that's the main kind of website for our program officially. Really, the focus of this web-based tool was to allow data exploration of interested parties.
So kind of along that lines, we have a question about how the data is represented. It says some of the plots on the dashboard, the size of the error bars will be really different across years. Is that a result of different sample size? And if so, can you add sample size to the dashboard?
That's a great question. I feel like I will need to go back a little bit and refresh all the different ways that we've displayed the data. I believe most of them are standard error bars. And so I do believe that sample size is accounted for in the fact that they're standard error bars that are on the data.
Okay, so another question here is, can you talk a little more about the unique characteristics that warranted the reserve designation at Cape Falcon?
A little bit more about the unique characteristics
that warranted reserve designation at Cape Falcon.
I think Cape Falcon is again a really interesting story, in part because there was quite a bit of engagement from the fishing community, about where to place the reserve, and where to place it in a way so that it wouldn't create, I'm going to say, an increased burden on the fishing community up there. In part because some of the access of the reef for the fishing community within, say, within 40 fathoms of that line, it's a little bit more limited in what areas are available than other places on the coast. And so there was, again, through these discussions and community groups and extensive public processes, consultations of weighing off the ecological benefits versus the socioeconomic impacts. And I would say Cape Falcon is a place where, I think the socioeconomic impacts, sort of outweighed some of the ecological potential benefits if you're going to think just strictly from an ecological perspective. But we do know that there are additional things like enforcement and compliance and people's behavior that also influence, data and ecological trends over time. And what's really exciting is within the last several years of doing monitoring up there, we've heard from a few members of the fishing community say, oh yeah, you put that reserve in the right spot. I mean, and so that's great. I feel like I would much rather have some buy-in from, the fishing community as opposed to, say, putting it perhaps in a spot with some better habitat, that really was quite a burden. I feel like we're consciously here in Oregon, weighing those trade-offs with our marine reserve system. And again, I think that's what makes our program really unique, and a really interesting facet in terms of, say, the larger marine reserves and protected area picture, because we both have human dimensions monitoring and ecological monitoring that happens here in Oregon.
So a little bit of question, moving away from the dashboard just for a second, but can you speak about what is the intent of the Marine Reserves Program after 2023?
Sure. So the current default is that the program moves forward and stays exactly the same. Really, the purpose of the program was to be able to sort of set up and establish a long-term monitoring program here on the Oregon coast, to be able to monitor these long-term changes, in part because some of the changes for some of the fish species, do take a long time to observe. And I'm sure, as many people know, the longer the time series of monitoring data, the more valuable it is. So really the program, this is a check-in I want to say to, make sure we are set up, to be a rigorous long-term monitoring program.
Nice. Okay, back to a little bit about setting up the data dashboard. During COVID times, and you were able to slow down and really take a look at the data, did you find anything interesting? Did any questions surface when you were reviewing the data that you weren't expecting?
Oh, I mean, absolutely all the time. From trying just to chase down some simple data errors, to actually digging in deep to, some of the metadata of earlier, surveys, that happened in the beginning of our program, 2010, 2011, and how data was recorded to make sure that it's consistent through time, to even as we start to dig around in some of the data, for example, with the ROV survey data, we do have data from several different locations before sea star wasting. And then we also have data from several locations post sea star wasting. So we're currently working with the ODFW Marine Habitat team that helps us run the ROV surveys, to basically understand, what's more of that sea star wasting story from Oregon's subtidal waters, and do we see consistent, trends in these different subtidal sea star species, across different sites on the Oregon coast.
Nice. Talking a little bit about data, there's a question here, and I might need more information, but are there more than 2 of data prior to the reserve implementation for most of the fish species?
Not fishery independent data. So we attempted to have 2 years of pre-implementation data for each of the reserves. In part because, when the program started, and these reserves were cited, in some places there had never, sort of been this type of monitoring of the ecosystem before. And so I think part of, what our program is currently working on now is really trying to get a handle on, the first several years of data collection, say, for example, at those early sites, how well do they actually represent, the reef and communities themselves, and how we're seeing change over time sort of throughout our limited time series so far. So I guess while there is some fishery dependent data, say from the specific ports, at times some of the spatial scales at times don't match up. But there are also other components of the ecosystem that are not fished, such as algae data, such as different invertebrate species, that play key roles and are important parts of the ecosystem, that we just didn't really have very much or any data before the program started.
Nice. Yeah, endless amounts of data, but pulling them all together and having them be compatible is always a challenge. We have a question here from Gail asking about complete checklist of species. Are they available online anywhere, or are they only given out with permission from your team?
Currently, they are not available online, but if you're interested, we can definitely, work with you to send you what you need. We're still working on, the best ways to share all the different types of information that our program collects. And so I'm not entirely sure if we would potentially move to having those species lists available, say, on this data dashboard in the future. But they're definitely available if you get in touch, for sure.
And we have a hard stop today at 4:30, and so I want to respect that. But let's see if we have one more question that I'll ask. And if anybody has other questions, or if I skipped one by accident, Lindsay has her contact information up on the screen, so you can feel free to reach out to her. And remember, this recording will go up on the past seminar page in a few days. But to wrap it up, can you talk to us a little bit about, will there be any biodiversity measures for each of the marine reserves that will be tracked over time, Lindsay?
Yes, there will be. And so there will be in a couple of different ways, some of which at several of the marine reserves that have sufficient intertidal habitat, we specifically do intertidal biodiversity surveys. We collaborate on those surveys with the multi-agency Rocky Intertidal Network. And so at those sites, which are 3 of our marine reserves, the Cascade Head, Otter Rock, and Cape Perpetua Marine Reserve, we do specific biodiversity surveys. We are also working on some species rarefaction curves, which is another measure of species diversity. When and where it's appropriate, there'll be several different diversity indices that are going into that synthesis report as well. So there are a couple of different components. Most of them relate to species diversity that we are currently working on, in addition to different ones related to abundance or community composition.
And I think the idea here is stay tuned. There's going to be so much more information that will be shared when the final report comes out. But first of all, thank you so much, Lindsay, for sharing this tool with us and giving us a preview of all of the hard work you and your team have been doing over the last few years. So thank you so much. And for everybody online, thank you for joining us. I hope to see you again next week. And again, everybody, just give Lindsay virtual thanks for spending her afternoon with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you everyone for paying attention. And if you have any comments, or you also want to take a bit more of a deeper dive talking about the data dashboard, please be in touch.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much. And again, Lindsay, thank you for your time. We'll
Thank
see
you.
everybody next week. Bye now.
Bye.